after the release of Are You Experienced with the singles Hey Joe and Purple Haze. So what do rock stars do in those days? They continued to produce hit albums with hit singles on them. So in 1968, Hendrix released his second album, which was Axis, Bold as Love. Axis, Bold as Love. That was his second album.
When was it?
1968. Second album, Axis, Bold as Love. And his final album was called Electric Landlady. And that came out in 68 as well. So he produces two new albums in 68, Axis, Bold as Love, and the second one was Electric Ladyland. And the big hit song on Electric Ladyland was actually a song that was written by Bob Dylan, which was entitled All Along the Watchtower. So Hendrix is kicking butt, man. He's released 3 albums in 2 years, less than 2 years, including Electric Landlady, which featured a song written by Bob Dylan, which was entitled All Along the Watchtower. Well, what happens to these bands after success? Well, that happens, but what happens in the end? They end up splitting up. And that happened with the Jimi Hendrix Experience early in 1969. They split up. And what happens, the split up usually comes because somebody's more popular than others. And that's again what happened with it. I mean, they called it the Jimi Hendrix Experience, right? So these other two fellas, Mitch Mitchell and Noel Redding, are kind of second fiddle. So they split up in early 1969. And in late 1969, Hendrix organizes another group known as the Band of Gypsies. Band of Gypsies. So in early 1969, they split up. In late 1969, Hendrix gets another group going known as the Band of Gypsies. And he also performed at Woodstock. What was the big thing he played at Woodstock that mesmerized everyone? You might be surprised what he played. Something patriotic. What was it? Star Spangled Banner. Yep, Star Spangled Banner. And I mean, it amazed the crowds with his guitar work on that. And it just was quite the hit at Woodstock, the Star Spangled Banner. Remember, we're playing that thing in 1969 during the height of what? Not the height, but towards the end, but we're in the middle of Vietnam, right after the Tet Offensive, okay? Well, he's working on his first album with the Band of Gypsies. And unfortunately, on September 18th, 1970, while working on that album, he also died from drug overdose complications. He also, 27 years old.
What year was it?
So he dies on September 18th, 1970, of drug overdose complications, and ironically is also just 27 years old.
Like rock stars that died with like age 27.
We're not even done yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So that's Jimi Hendrix. Okay, we're going to move on to Jim Morrison. Anybody heard of him? He was the lead singer of the group The Doors. Okay, The Doors. Anybody heard of them? Yeah, The Doors. Now he's got a little bit of history. This is kind of an interesting story, Jimmy Morrison. He was born in 1943 in Florida. Born in 1943 in Florida. Now, this is kind of how history repeats. His father was a naval aviator and commander of a ship called the USS Bonhomme Richard. Okay? His father, now think about this, his father was a naval aviator and was the commander of a battleship, the USS Bonhomme Richard. Now, this is what is weird. Remember I told you what event sparked the biggest mistake in legislation this country's ever passed, in my opinion? I told you. What piece of legislation, I tell you, was a horrible piece of legislation that passed? What? Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. This ship was one of the ships that was attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin that led to the resolution, which led to the events in Vietnam. Jim Morrison's father was a naval aviator and was commander of the USS Bonhomme Richard during the Gulf of Tonkin incident that helped ignite the Vietnam War. His dad commanded one of those two ships that were attacked. That's kind of interesting. Now, in his early years, Jim Morrison was very dutiful. What does that mean? Dutiful. Did what he was told? Obedient. Very highly intelligent. He excelled in school. He was very interested in reading, writing, and drawing. He was a very good all-around student in his youth. He was dutiful or obedient, did what he was told. He was highly intellectual. As a child, he excelled in school. And he took an interest in reading, writing, and drawing. Now, he had a traumatic experience at the age of 5, which really kind of turned his thinking a little bit. He and his family were driving through the New Mexico desert. They were driving through the New Mexico desert. His family drives upon an accident. A truck that was full of Native American workers had crashed. There were dead and mutilated bodies all across the highway. And his family drove up on that. I guess quite a gross scene. Terrible accident. Truck filled with too many Native American workers. They kind of packed them in there. Got involved in an accident, and as they drove up, there were just dead and mutilated bodies all over the highway. And that took a tremendous toll on that vision did for him at 5. And it made such an impression upon him that he described that experience in the lyrics of a song that he wrote called Peace Frog. Peace Frog. So even when he got older and interested in music, that one incident when he was 5 influenced him so much that he wrote about that experience in the lyrics of a song that was entitled Peace Frog. Now, what do you do if you're a military brat? A military brat is someone that is fathers in the military. What do you do a lot of? Anybody? Move. And he moved from Florida to California to Virginia. And that's where he went to high school. Ironically, he went to high school in Alexandria, Virginia. So he moved a lot as a child due to his father's naval service. He moved from Florida to California. They then moved to Alexandria, Virginia. And it was in Alexandria, Virginia where he went to high school. And he went up to a high school called George Washington High School. Now, up to that point, he was a very dutiful, hard-working young man. But when he got into high school, he started to rebel. And mainly it was against his father's strict discipline, because if you have a Navy father, an Army father, they're used to strict discipline, and normally they put that into you. If you have dads that were in the military, they probably have a little different philosophy on discipline than maybe us that did not serve in the military. And so Morrison started to rebel against his father's strict discipline. And what did he find that really started to screw him up? He found, first of all, alcohol, and according to history, women. So alcohol and women was his first vices. So he discovered alcohol and women, and he bristled all forms of authority. Okay, he bristled all forms of authority. Well, that didn't mean he was a pathetic loser. He actually did graduate from high school in 1961. And he went back to Florida and enrolled at Florida State University. So he was a smart kid. Very smart kid. So he graduates from high school even though he's rebelling against his father, drinking some alcohol and chasing some gals. But he graduates from high school in 1961. And he goes to Florida State University. And he makes the dean's list his freshman year. He does very well. Makes the dean's list. Well, he decides after his freshman year that he wanted to study film. Where's the best place to study film? What's that? California. And so he went to the University of California, Los Angeles, also known as UCLA. University of California at Los Angeles is known as UCLA. And he transferred from Florida State to UCLA to study film. Well, when he got to UCLA, he kind of lost his interest in film and started to get a keen interest in poetry. So he developed a keen interest in poetry at UCLA, and he lost interest in the film industry. Then he got kind of bored in general. He wanted to drop out of UCLA, but he decided to stay there. Because what was his two options if he dropped out of college? Military or go to work. And he was quoted as saying, after he decided to stay, I didn't want to go into the army and I didn't want to work. And that's the damn truth. So he stayed in college to avoid both of those. He didn't really want to go get a job and he didn't want to go to the service. Okay, so he stayed at UCLA. Well, who did he meet at UCLA? Members of what would become a rock group known as the Doors. So what he did at UCLA after deciding to stay in there is he continued his interest in music, poetry, film, and he met a group of fellas that would eventually become the rock group the Doors. When you start a rock group, what do you got to get somebody to do? You got to get a record label, which means what? Some musical company has to sign you, okay? And we'll talk about that when we get into Beatles on about 3 or 4 that really screwed up. But his group was signed in 1966 by Elektra Records. So in 1966 they get a break, and the Doors are signed by Elektra Records. And so what's their goal now? What do they want to release? Their first album. And they do that in January of 1967. And it had a hit song that I'm going to let you listen to in a few minutes called Light My Fire. Light My Fire. And in June of 1967, that song, Light My Fire, reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 Singles chart. That was a big deal in the 60s and 70s. They had the top 100 hits in the country, came out weekly. And it was a big deal. How long can Light My Fire stay at #1? So that was a big thing for musicians, is to be on the Billboard Hot 100 Singles list, which, I remember in high school, that thing was still out. Okay, and you always paid attention to what the top songs were. Well, they were invited to perform on what famous show? The Ed Sullivan Show. Well, it didn't go that well, because we were conservative in those days. And Ed Sullivan was concerned about one of the lyrics in the song, Light My Fire. You'll get a chance to hear it. And it said, girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Anyway, Ed Sullivan thought that referred to what? Drug use. So he told him, you can perform, but you cannot use that lyric, because that's a little off the top here. So the Doors were invited to the Ed Sullivan Show that year. However, it did not go over very well. Ed Sullivan said he did not want to hear the lyric, girl, we couldn't get much higher, because he thought it referred to drug use. And Morrison agreed not to sing it, because of its obvious drug reference. Well, what do you think happened? This is live TV. What did he do? Sang it anyway. So his rebellion, he became rock's first real rebel. So when the cameras rolled, Morrison went ahead and sang it anyway, cementing his status as rock and roll's new rebel hero. Needless to say, they were not invited back. So anyway, he got his point across. Well, the group released 5 smash albums. Very, very popular albums with a lot of singles. But Morrison's life was spiraling out of control because of continued drug use. Okay? And he was kind of the first male rock and roll sex star. I mean, he was one that was very much reveled as a sex symbol for the rock groups. There wasn't a lot of women, if any, rock singers at all. They'll become a few. But he got tired of being looked at as just a sexual rock star. So he got tired of the attention. So he moved to Paris with his longtime girlfriend, Pamela Corson, in the spring of 1971. So growing tired of what he was doing, growing tired of being a sex symbol for the rock world, getting tired of all the hassle and publicity. He's in trouble with the law, so he's trying to avoid more trouble with the law because of his drug use. He decides to kind of get away, and he moves to Paris, France with his longtime girlfriend, Pamela Corson, in 1971. So he gets out of the country. Well, just because he moved to Paris didn't mean he stopped his alcohol abuse and his drug abuse, and he had tremendous depression. It's funny how people that are really successful sometimes are our most depressed individuals because of the pressures. So he goes to Paris, but that didn't stop him from using alcohol to an excess. It didn't stop him from using drugs to an excess. It didn't help his depression. And on July 3rd, 1971, he was found dead in the bathtub of he and Corson's apartment of apparent heart failure. So on July 3rd, 1971, Corson found Morrison dead in the bathtub of their apartment of apparent heart failure. How did that happen? Well, we're not sure. We do know that Morrison and Corson were taking part in snorting heroin the night before his death. Corson claimed that she had gone to bed, and Morrison decided to take a hot bath before retiring for the evening. This is what she testified to. So, Morrison and Corson were taking part in snorting heroin the night before his death. She claimed when she was given an opportunity to state what happened that she had gone to bed, and Morrison decided to take a hot bath before retiring for the evening. Well, this didn't die. People stayed with this. And finally, a report came out in 2007. I mean, think about that. How many years later? And the report that came out in 2007 stated that Morrison actually died of a heroin overdose at a local nightclub and was brought back to his apartment and placed in the bathtub. That's the story. No, absolute proof, but after years of research, there was some thought that probably Morrison actually died of a heroin overdose, which kind of makes sense because they were snorting it right the night before. And he went to a nightclub. They say he died there, and his body was brought back to his apartment and placed in that. We'll never know. Hey, I'm going to give you a little video here. Would you like to see a little, come on baby, light my fire? Now I want to just preface this by saying this isn't your tune. I mean, this isn't your type of music, but try to enjoy what people enjoyed in 1960, because this was a big deal. I'm not saying you'll like it, okay? Probably you will not. But it is history, and it's a group that is very, very important in our rock history of the 60s.
What was it that Ricky was telling us had a copy of Byron's poems?
Had what?
He was a rock star.
Are you asking me?
No, I'm talking to Jeff.
Oh. How about the lights there, Mary? Now again, I'm not guaranteeing you're going to like these songs, but I think that you can get an idea of what the liking was as far as people's interest in music at the time. Are you ready for the treat of the century? This is live here. 1968.
I tell you this, no eternal reward will forgive us now for wasting the dawn. One morning you awoke in the strange sun, and opening your door,
Anybody heard this before? Yeah, okay.